I've always believed that a father's love isn't measured by grand gestures, but by the small, silent sacrifices he makes every single day. When my wife, Anna, passed away 20 years ago, our daughter Emily was just 8 years old, too young to understand loss, but old enough to feel the void it left behind. From that day on, my world revolved around one mission: to raise her in a way that her mother would have been proud of. I wasn't perfect, far from it. I burned more dinners than I care to admit, forgot school picture days, and once sent Emily to class with mismatched shoes. But I tried. Every morning before work, I'd braid her hair, often clumsily, and she'd giggle, saying, "Dad, Mom would give you a C- for effort." Her laughter was the glue that held my broken heart together. I worked as a mechanic in a small-town garage, and though the pay wasn't much, I made sure Emily never felt deprived. I skipped new clothes, vacations, even dinners out, just so she could go to dance lessons, join school trips, and later attend college. Whenever she'd apologize for the cost, I'd tell her, "You're my greatest investment, sweetheart." And I meant every word. Emily was bright, determined, and kind, a combination of her mother's gentleness and my stubbornness. As she grew older, she became my pride and joy. We had a rhythm to our lives: movie nights every Friday, pancakes on Sundays, and long drives where we talk about everything from her friends to her dreams. She used to say, "Dad, when I get married, my husband has big shoes to fill. No one can top you." I never thought much about that promise until years later, when she brought home a man named Mark, but back then life felt simple and pure. I still remember the day she graduated college, standing there in her cap and gown, holding her diploma, scanning the crowd until she found me. The way she ran into my arms made every struggle worth it. "We did it, Dad," she said. "We really did." After graduation, she got a good job in marketing and moved into a small apartment in the city. It was hard letting her go, but I knew she needed to build her own life. I'd call her every Sunday evening, pretending not to worry, asking the usual: "Eating well? Locking your doors? Car running fine?" She'd laugh, "Dad, you sound like a checklist." But she always answered patiently. On her birthdays, I'd drive 2 hours just to surprise her with her favorite cake, chocolate with strawberries. She always made me feel welcome, always called me her hero. Those were words that carried me through the loneliest nights. In those years, our relationship became more like that of two best friends than father and daughter. She'd tell me about work, friends, even the men she dated, though she'd always add, "Don't worry, Dad, no one's getting your approval until they pass the dad test." I used to joke, "That's a high bar, young lady." Back then, I never imagined that one day she'd marry a man who would not only fail that test miserably, but also drive a wedge between us. But in that moment, before the storms, before the hurtful words and the broken trust, we were happy. It was me and my little girl against the world, just like it had always been. If I had known how much things would change, maybe I would have held her a little tighter that last time she said, "Don't worry, Dad, you'll always be my number one." Because in my heart, she still is, no matter what came after. The first time Emily mentioned Mark, her voice carried that soft, hopeful tone I hadn't heard in years. "Dad," she said over the phone, "there's someone I want you to meet." I could hear the smile in her words. My heart warmed instantly. After all, every parent dreams of seeing their child loved and cherished. When the day finally came, I made sure everything at home looked perfect. I even polished the old wooden dining table, the one Anna and I bought together when we first got married. Emily arrived, glowing with happiness, and beside her stood Mark, tall, handsome, neatly dressed, with the kind of confidence that fills a room before he even speaks. "Mr. Thompson," he said, offering his hand with a firm grip. "It's an honor to finally meet you." There was something about the way he held eye contact, steady, almost rehearsed. He was polite, even charming, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Still, I brushed off the uneasy feeling. I wanted to trust my daughter's judgment. Dinner started well enough. Mark complimented my cooking, laughed at my old garage stories, and spoke about his job in finance. "We just closed a deal worth 7 figures, he said proudly, glancing at Emily, who smiled like a proud partner. I noticed the way she hung on to every word he said, her admiration shining. That made me happy for a while, but as the evening went on, I began to notice the subtle things. How Mark interrupted her mid-sentence to clarify her stories. How he corrected her casually, even when she was right. When I mentioned how Emily used to fix the car with me as a kid, he smirked and said, "Really? I can't imagine her doing that. She's more of a city girl now, aren't you, He laughed, but Emily just lowered her eyes and gave a small, uneasy smile. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe I was being overprotective, fathers often are. But that night, after they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't sit right over the next few months. I saw less of Emily. She said work was busy, that she and Mark were spending weekends at his friends' places or traveling. When she did visit, Mark was always there, always taking charge of the conversation, always making me feel like a guest in my own home. One Sunday, as we sat together, Mark commented on my garage job. "You've been a mechanic your whole life? Must be tough, working with your hands every day." His tone wasn't curious. It was condescending, disguised behind a polite smile. Emily quickly changed the subject, but I noticed how her shoulders tensed. I could have responded sharply. But I didn't. I just nodded and said, "Honest work never scared me." Still, I saw a flicker in Mark's eyes, a hint of irritation that I hadn't taken the bait. He liked to be the smartest man in the room, that much was clear. As time passed, the little remarks piled up. He'd say things like, "Emily, your dad's sweet, but he's a bit old-fashioned," or "You should really let me handle these things. Your dad means well, but times have changed." Each comment chipped away at the respect that once filled our conversations. Emily began echoing his words, gently at first, then more firmly. "Dad, you're too traditional," she'd say. "Mark just sees things differently. You should try to understand him." And I did try. God knows I did. For my daughter's sake, I swallowed my pride and let the small things slide. I told myself that as long as she was happy, I could tolerate anything, but happiness built on control never lasts. Deep down, I sensed a storm brewing, one that would soon test the limits of love, patience, and respect. It started subtly, the kind of disrespect that hides behind a smile, so quiet you almost convince yourself you imagined it. But I didn't imagine it. I felt every small sting, every mocking glance, every quiet dismissal that came from Mark. One Saturday, Emily and Mark invited me to dinner at their new house, a modern 2-story place with glass walls, spotless furniture, and the cold perfection of something bought, not built. Emily greeted me with her usual warmth, hugging me tightly. "I made your favorite, Dad, roast chicken," she said. My heart swelled. But the warmth of that moment didn't last long. Mark strolled in, dressed in a tailored shirt, a glass of wine already in his hand. "Ah, the legend himself," he said with a grin that felt rehearsed. "Emily told me you're the type who fixes everything, cars, pipes, even people. Guess we all need a man like that once in a while." He laughed. I smiled politely, but something in his tone made my stomach twist. The words weren't complimentary, they were belittling, wrapped in humor. Emily giggled awkwardly, then quickly started setting the table to diffuse the tension. At dinner, the pattern continued. I'd share a story about Emily's childhood, her first bicycle, the way she used to pretend to fix cars beside me with a toy wrench, and Mark would interrupt halfway. "Wow, you two really lived the small-town dream," he said, smirking. "So, when did you decide to move on from that kind of life, Em?" Emily forced a laugh. "Mark, come on," she said softly. But she didn't look at me. That hurt more than his words. Later that evening, as I was about to leave, I noticed Mark whisper something to her near the doorway. She hesitated before speaking. "Dad," she began, "Mark just thinks maybe you shouldn't worry about helping us so much. We're fine on our own now." It was such a small thing, a reasonable thing, but I could hear the undertone. Mark didn't want me involved. He didn't want me around. Still, I nodded and smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. I just want to see you happy." But happiness, I was beginning to realize, didn't live in that house. A few weeks later, they came to my place for dinner. I had cooked everything from scratch, her childhood favorites, mashed potatoes, roast beef, and the apple pie her mother used to make. As we ate, Mark poked at his food with a fork. "It's good," he said flatly, "though I'm more into healthier meals these days. Emily's trying to get me to cut down on traditional cooking." Traditional. That word stung, the way he said it, like it meant outdated, embarrassing. Wrong dot. When Emily excused herself to the kitchen, Mark leaned back in his chair and glanced around my modest home. "You've lived here a long time," he said. "Ever think of selling? You could probably move into something easier to manage at your age." At your age. The words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to respond sharply, but I saw Emily return, her smile fragile. I swallowed the bitterness and said nothing. When they left that night, I stood at the window, watching their car disappear into the dark. I'd never felt so much like an outsider in my own daughter's life. I told myself it was just growing pains, that Mark would come around, that Emily would see the truth eventually. But the truth was already there, whispering beneath every joke he made. Mark didn't just want my daughter's respect. He wanted her to forget mine, and the worst part? She was beginning to let him. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It came quietly, like a knife slipped between the ribs. So smooth you almost don't feel it until the ache sets in. It was a Sunday afternoon. One of those days when I'd usually drive over with groceries for Emily and Mark, a habit from the early days of their marriage. I liked to think I was helping, though I knew Emily didn't really need it. Still, she always greeted me with a hug and a smile. Or at least she used to. That day when I arrived, Emily seemed uneasy. She was setting the table, her hands moving too quickly, her voice a touch too cheerful. "You didn't have to bring so much, Dad," she said as I placed the grocery bags on the counter. "Mark's going to think I'm spoiled." Before I could answer, Mark walked in. "Think?" he said with a smirk. "I already know she is." He laughed at his own joke, pouring himself a glass of wine. I forced a polite smile. "Good to see you too, Mark." We sat down for lunch, and for a few minutes it was peaceful. But peace around Mark was like glass. It could shatter with the slightest pressure. It started when I mentioned an old friend, Bill, whose son had just opened his own mechanic shop. "Hard-working young man," I said. "He reminds me a bit of myself when I was younger." Mark chuckled. "Still clinging to the old-school ways, huh? These days, no one survives just by turning wrenches and fixing engines. You've got to think bigger, invest, take risks." I looked at him steadily. "There's dignity in honest work, Mark. Not everything's about taking risks." His smile tightened. "Sure," he said, swirling his glass. "But some people take comfort in staying small. It's easier that way." Emily glanced nervously between us. "Mark, that's not what he meant. It's fine," I interrupted, keeping my tone calm. "He's entitled to his opinion." But inside, something was stirring. Not anger, disappointment. Deep, heavy disappointment that this was the man my daughter had chosen to build her life with. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. Afterward, as Emily cleared the dishes, I stood to help. But Mark's voice cut through the air. "You can sit, Mr. Thompson. Emily's got it." That was it. I met his eyes. "You know, Mark, I was raised to believe respect goes both ways." The room froze. Emily stopped mid-step, holding a plate. Mark smirked. "Is that your way of saying I don't respect you?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm saying that if you expect respect from me, you might start by showing some." Emily set the plate down and turned to me, her expression hardening. "Dad, stop. You're overreacting." I looked at her, stunned. "Overreacting?" "Emily, I've been quiet through all his remarks, all the little jabs." "Dad!" She interrupted sharply. "Mark is my husband. You need to respect him. He's the man of this family now." For a moment, I couldn't move. Her words hit like a cold wind through an open window. The same daughter who used to run to me for comfort, who once called me her hero, was now standing in front of me, defending the man who belittled me. Mark leaned back. Watching with quiet satisfaction, I nodded slowly. "I see," I said softly. "If that's what you want, Emily, then I'll give you space." Her eyes softened for a moment, but pride held her tongue. "That's for the best," she said quietly. I gathered my coat and left without another word. As I walked to my car, I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to forgive her, because love doesn't disappear overnight. But as I drove home, her words echoed in my mind. Respect my husband. I had. I always had. But now it was clear respect wasn't what Mark wanted. What he wanted was control, and my daughter couldn't see it. Not yet. After that Sunday, silence grew between us like an uninvited guest. Emily stopped calling as often. When she did, the conversations felt scripted, polite, brief, missing the laughter that once filled them. And whenever I suggested visiting, there was always an excuse. "Mark's been busy. We're traveling this weekend." "Maybe next month, Dad." At first, I told myself not to take it personally. She was married now, building her own life. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just time or distance keeping us apart. It was him, Mark. The few times I did see her, something in her had changed. The sparkle in her eyes, that light that once made her whole face come alive, was dimmer now, hidden behind polite smiles and careful words. I noticed how she glanced at Mark before answering questions, as if silently asking permission. It broke something inside me every time. One afternoon, I decided to stop by their house unannounced, something I used to do often before the confrontation. I brought along a small gift, a framed photo of the three of us from her college graduation. I'd kept a copy for myself, the last picture where she truly looked carefree. When I arrived, Mark opened the door. He didn't even try to hide his displeasure. "Oh," he said, leaning on the doorframe, "this is unexpected." "I was in the area," I replied. "Thought I'd drop something off for Emily." He sighed dramatically. "She's resting. Long week. Maybe next time." Before I could respond, Emily appeared behind him, her eyes widening slightly. "Dad, you're here," she said, forcing a smile. Mark turned, his jaw tightening, but she ignored him and stepped forward to hug me. It was brief, hesitant, like she was afraid he'd disapprove. I handed her the photo frame. "Just a little memory," I said. She looked down at it, and for a moment her face softened. But then Mark cleared his throat. "We really should get back to what we were doing," he said. "Dinner's getting cold?" I knew when I wasn't wanted. "Of course," I said, smiling faintly. "Didn't mean to intrude." As I turned to leave, I heard him say under his breath, "Boundaries, Emily, we talked about this." The words burned in my chest the whole drive home. Weeks turned into months. I'd send texts she didn't answer, leave voicemails she never returned. The distance became routine, the silence normal. Yet every night I'd sit by my window staring at my phone, waiting for her name to light up the screen. One evening around Christmas, she finally called. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Dad, I'm sorry I've been so distant. Things have just been hectic," I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "It's all right, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause, long, shaky. Then she said quietly, "Mark thinks I depend on you too much. He says it makes him feel undermined." I gripped the phone tighter. "You know I'd never interfere, Emily." "I know," she whispered. "But he doesn't." It was the first time I heard the exhaustion in her tone, the weariness she tried to hide. Before I could say more, Mark's voice echoed faintly in the background. "Who are you talking to?" She quickly said, "I have to go." "Merry Christmas, Dad?" And the line went dead. That night, I sat alone by the dim glow of the tree lights, the same lights we used to hang together every year. Her laughter once filled this house. Now, only silence did. I began to understand something painful. I hadn't lost my daughter overnight. I'd been losing her little by little with every compromise she made, every apology she whispered for things that weren't her fault. And though I tried to tell myself she'd come back one day, a father's heart always knows when his child is in trouble. Even when she says she's fine, I just didn't know how bad things really were. Not yet. It was a rainy Thursday night when I heard the knock, soft, hesitant, almost frightened. I wasn't expecting anyone. The hour was late, and the storm outside rattled the windows like it wanted to come in. I opened the door, and there she was, My Emily. She stood under the porch light, soaked from the rain, her hair clinging to her face, eyes red and swollen. She looked nothing like the confident young woman I'd raised. She looked like a frightened child again, the same little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can I stay here tonight?" I didn't ask questions. I just stepped aside and said, "Always." She came in, dripping water onto the floor, clutching her purse like a lifeline. I fetched her a towel and one of her old sweatshirts, the faded gray one with the university logo she used to wear when she studied late at night. When she put it on, she seemed smaller somehow, fragile in a way I'd never seen before. I made her tea, but she didn't touch it. She just sat there on the couch, staring at her hands. The silence between us was heavy, the kind that carries stories too painful to speak. Finally, I said softly, "Emily, what happened?" Her lip quivered. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, pretend everything was fine. But then the tears came, slow at first, then breaking loose all at once. "You were right about him," she sobbed. "You were right about Mark?" I sat beside her, not touching her yet, just letting her speak at her own pace. He's not who I thought he was, Dad," she said, her voice cracking. "At first, he was perfect, charming, thoughtful, everything I thought I wanted. But after the wedding, he started changing. Or maybe he was always like that and I just didn't see it." She wiped her face with shaking hands. "It started with little things, controlling what I wore, who I talked to, how I spent money. He'd say it was for my own good, that he just wanted us to have a better future. And then he started yelling. Not always loudly, but cruelly, like he enjoyed watching me feel small. I felt something tighten in my chest, anger, sorrow, helplessness, all tangled together. But I stayed quiet. She needed to speak, not be interrupted. There were days," she continued, "when I'd sit in the car after work just to delay going home. I stopped seeing my friends. Stopped calling you because he said you were a bad influence, that you didn't respect him enough, that you made me question him." Her voice broke again. "I didn't want to believe it, Dad. I thought if I just tried harder, he'd change." Tears welled in my own eyes. "Sweetheart," I said quietly, "you don't need to try to fix someone who's determined to break you." She sobbed harder then, and I wrapped my arms around her, the first real embrace we'd shared in months. She clung to me like she was holding on to something she thought she'd lost forever. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into my shoulder. "I told you to respect him. I told you he was the man of the family. I didn't see what he was doing to me. Until now." I stroked her hair gently. "There's nothing to be sorry for, Emily. You wanted to believe in love. That's never wrong. What's wrong is how he treated you." When she finally fell asleep on the couch, I sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her breath. For the first time in a long time, she looked peaceful outside. The storm raged on, but inside I felt a calm resolve settle over me. Tomorrow, I would help her take her life back, because no man, no matter how charming or clever, would ever break my daughter again. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a pale gray sky that seemed to mirror the quiet in the house. Emily was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face softer now, free, for once, from fear. I stood in the doorway, watching her. My little girl, the same child I'd once carried on my shoulders to see fireworks, now carrying the weight of a man's cruelty. When she finally stirred, blinking in the morning light, she looked disoriented, as if waking from a long nightmare. "Did I really fall asleep here?" she murmured. "You needed the rest," I said gently. "You're safe now." She sat up slowly, brushing her hair from her face. Then almost instinctively, she looked toward the door, as though she half expected Mark to burst in. That small movement told me everything I needed to know about the kind of fear she'd been living with. Over breakfast, she began to talk, hesitantly at first, then with more openness than I'd heard in years. She told me how Mark had been monitoring her phone, checking her emails, questioning her every move. How he'd taken control of their finances, insisting her paycheck go into a joint account he managed entirely. How he'd isolated her from her friends, convincing her they were jealous of their marriage. I thought that's what love was supposed to be, she said quietly. Compromise, trust, but I kept giving and he kept taking until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. I listened without interrupting. Every word felt like a punch, but I knew she needed to say them, to purge the poison he'd filled her with. When she was done, I reached across the table and took her hand. Emily, listen to me. This isn't love. Love doesn't make you afraid. It doesn't silence you or make you smaller. Love makes you feel seen, and you deserve that. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were the first signs of release. I don't know where to start, she whispered. He's everywhere in my life, in my accounts, my apartment, my decisions. I feel trapped. I squeezed her hand. Then we start small. You're not alone anymore. That day we began quietly planning. I helped her open a separate bank account in her own name. We found her an old friend's spare apartment she could stay in temporarily. I contacted a Lauer I knew, an honest man who had helped me years ago when I nearly lost the house after Anna's death. Every step felt like rebuilding her from the ground up, carefully, patiently, with love. And for the first time in months, I saw glimpses of the old Emily returning, her sense of humor, her focus, that sharp glint of strength that Mark had tried to extinguish. At one point, she looked at me and said, I don't know how you stayed so calm through all of this. I feel like I've destroyed everything between us. I smiled faintly. You can't destroy something that never stopped existing, sweetheart. You may have lost your way, but you never lost me. That night, she moved into the spare apartment. We carried boxes up the narrow stairs, clothes, books, a few keepsakes she'd managed to grab before leaving. When she set down the last one, she turned to me and said, It's not much, but it feels like mine. I nodded. That's all that matters. As I left, she hugged me tightly, whispering, Thank you for not giving up on me. And I thought to myself, I never could. A father's love doesn't vanish when his child makes mistakes. It only grows stronger when they need saving. What I didn't know then was that Mark wouldn't let go so easily. He was about to show us both just how dangerous his pride could be. I knew it was only a matter of time before Mark found out. Men like him don't let go quietly. Their pride won't allow it. Still, I wasn't prepared for how fast it would happen, Dot. It was 3 days after Emily moved into the small apartment. I had just finished fixing an old neighbor's car in the garage when I heard the sound of a vehicle screeching to a halt outside my house. Tires splashed against the wet pavement. Then the slam of a car door. When I stepped outside, Mark was already halfway up the driveway. His expensive shoes splattered with mud, his eyes dark and wild. The man who used to wear smug charm like armor now looked like a storm barely held together. Where is she? He barked. I didn't flinch. Hello to you too, Mark. Don't play games with me, he snapped, stepping closer. You think you can just take my wife away? You think you can poison her against me? I kept my voice calm. She's not a possession to be taken. She made a choice, to be safe. His jaw tightened. Safe? You're filling her head with lies. She's confused, emotional. She doesn't know what she's doing. I looked him straight in the eye. No, Mark, she finally does. For a second, I thought he might hit me. He stepped forward, his fists clenching, his breath heavy. But then I saw headlights down the street, Emily's car pulling in. She hadn't planned to come by, but fate has its timing. When she saw him, she froze. Mark, she breathed, her voice shaking. He spun around. You! How could you humiliate me like this? Emily instinctively stepped back, but I moved beside her. That's enough, I said firmly. Mark glared at me. Stay out of this, old man. This is between me and my wife. No, Emily said, her voice trembling but strong. It's between you and yourself. You did this, Mark. You destroyed everything. He laughed bitterly. Oh, so now I'm the villain after everything I've done for you? The house, the car, the life you wanted? You gave me things, she said, but you took away everything that mattered. My peace, my confidence, my family. He took a step toward her, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just walk away from me? That's when I stepped fully between them. You take one more step, and this conversation ends with the police. For a moment, time froze. Mark's nostrils flared. I could see the war behind his eyes, pride versus fear. Then he sneered. You're pathetic, both of you. She come crawling back once she realizes you have nothing to offer her. I didn't respond. I just took out my phone, pressing a button to start dialing. Mark's eyes flicked to it and his smirk faded. You'd really call them? I already did, I lied smoothly. They're on their way. That was enough. He cursed under his breath, spun on his heel, and stalked back to his car. The engine roared, and within seconds he was gone, leaving nothing but the echo of his rage behind. Emily collapsed into my arms, trembling. I thought he might hurt you, she whispered. I held her tight. He can't touch either of us anymore. We stood there for a long while, under the dull glow of the porch light, the night air heavy with rain and relief. It wasn't over yet, I knew that, but something inside both of us had shifted. Emily had faced him. She had found her voice again. As I guided her inside, I looked at her, tired, but stronger than she'd ever been, and I realized that this was the moment everything changed. Mark had lost control, and Emily had finally taken it back. The days that followed felt like stepping into sunlight after a long, bitter winter. Everything still looked the same streets, the same quiet mornings, but there was a new stillness to life. The kind that comes after a storm finally breaks. Emily stayed with me for a few weeks, while her Laura handled the divorce papers. It wasn't easy. Mark didn't take it well. He sent messages at first, long, manipulative paragraphs filled with half apologies and veiled threats. Then came the calls. Dozens of them every night. Sometimes he'd just stay silent on the other end, breathing, but Emily didn't crumble this time. Every time the phone rang, she'd take a deep breath, block the number, and move on. Each small act of defiance rebuilt her piece by piece. One evening, as we sat on the porch, she said quietly, You know, I used to think strength meant holding everything together, the marriage, the image, even my own pain. But now I realize strength is knowing when to let go. I looked at her, proud and aching all at once. You didn't just let go, I said. You took your life back. Her divorce finalized faster than either of us expected. Mark fought it at first, but the evidence, the financial control, the verbal abuse, the witnesses who'd heard him, spoke for itself. The day the papers were signed, she came home with quiet tears in her eyes. It's over, she said simply. We didn't celebrate with champagne or parties. Instead, I made her favorite dinner, mashed potatoes and roast chicken, the same meal she used to love as a kid. As we ate, she laughed softly. I can't remember the last time I felt this peaceful. I smiled. That's because peace doesn't come from people who make you doubt your worth. Over time, she started finding herself again. She reconnected with her old friends, got promoted at work, and even began volunteering at a local women's shelter. I want to help others who went through what I did, she said one evening. If someone had told me I wasn't crazy, that I didn't deserve the way he treated me, maybe I would have left sooner. Her strength humbled me. Watching her heal was like watching a flower bloom again after being crushed under a stone. Slowly, carefully, she came back to life. One Saturday, we went to the park, the same one we used to visit when she was little. She brought 2 sandwiches, a thermos of coffee, and that same mischievous grin I thought I'd lost forever. As we sat under the old oak tree, she turned to me and said, Dad, I owe you an apology. I frowned. For what? For the day I told you to respect Mark, she said softly. I thought I was protecting my marriage, but I was really protecting my pride. You didn't deserve that. I reached out and squeezed her hand. You were doing what you thought was right. Love makes us blind sometimes, but what matters is that you found your way back. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. You never stopped respecting me, even when I didn't deserve it, she said. I smiled gently. That's what fathers do. We hold the light until our children can see again. The sun was setting behind her, the sky glowing gold and pink, the same colors I remembered from her childhood afternoons. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter not as someone I needed to protect, but as a woman who had finally learned to protect herself. The nightmare was behind her now. And in its place, a quiet strength had taken root, one that no one could ever take away again. Months passed, and life found its rhythm again. The seasons changed. Winter's chill gave way to the warmth of spring, and with it, our hearts began to thaw completely. The house that had once felt haunted by silence now echoed with laughter again. Emily visited often, sometimes bringing fresh flowers, sometimes just herself. She'd sit with a cup of tea, her eyes brighter, her voice lighter. Every visit was proof that healing, though slow, was real. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the porch, the sky awash with amber and rose, she asked quietly, "Dad, do you ever wish things had been different?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Different how? I mean, that I'd listened to you sooner, that I hadn't pushed you away, that I hadn't let him treat you and me the way he did. I turned to her and smiled softly. Emily, life doesn't give us do-overs, but it gives us lessons. Sometimes the hardest way is the only way we really learn. She nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I used to think you were just being stubborn, she said, her tone filled with quiet remorse. But you were trying to protect me, and I hated you for it. I chuckled. You didn't hate me. You just needed to believe your world made sense. When someone you love convinces you that they're right, it's hard to see the truth, even when it's right in front of you. She looked down at her hands. He made me feel like I owed him my loyalty, even when he didn't deserve it. That's what manipulators do, I said gently. They twist love into something you have to earn. But love isn't earned, it's shared. Freely, equally. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with that same strength I'd seen returning piece by piece. I see that now, and I'm never letting anyone make me small again. I smiled, proud beyond words. That's my girl. We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the evening sounds, the hum of crickets, the distant laughter of kids down the street, the whisper of wind through the trees. Then she said, "You know, when I told you to respect Mark, I thought I was being a good wife. I thought that's what marriage meant, putting him above everything. But now I understand that respect doesn't mean submission. It means balance." I nodded. And real respect goes both ways. If someone demands it but never gives it, that's not respect, that's control. She smiled, the last traces of guilt fading from her face. I used to think I had ruined everything between us. But I realize now you never stopped believing in me, even when I was lost. I placed my hand over hers. A parent's love doesn't disappear, Emily, it waits. Sometimes it waits in silence, sometimes in pain, but it never gives up. Her eyes shimmered in the fading light. "You're the reason I found myself again?" she whispered. I looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was dipping below the fields. "No, Emily, you're the reason you found yourself again." I just stood here, holding the light. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a long while we didn't speak. We didn't need to. The air was calm, the world quiet, as if even the sky was listening. Moment. I realized something profound. Sometimes love's truest form isn't in protecting someone from pain, it's in standing beside them as they rise from it. That night, after she left, I sat alone on the porch, the stars blinking softly overhead. I thought of everything we'd been through, the anger, the heartbreak, the fear, and I felt an unexpected peace. My daughter had once ordered me to respect her husband, but in the end she learned to respect herself. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.